sounds just pass through us. We hear them without even noticing. A breath, a single note. But every so often, a sound does more. It opens something up, a question, a shift in how we sense the space around us, or how we understand what we're experiencing. In this episode, there are no tidy definitions or prepackaged labels. Instead, we enter a space without fixed boundaries, with someone who resists ready-made categories and invites us to rethink what it means to work with sound as an art form. And it leaves us asking, what do people mean by experimental art? And what does experimental even mean anyway?
To be honest, I'm not the one who labels myself as an experimental musician. That's not how I define what I do. Personally, I don't like the term for many reasons. From a language point of view, and in Arabic, of course, because it's not an Arabic expression. And in some ways, it doesn't represent what I do culturally and artistically as well. But anyway, the main reason is that I don't really see what I do as experimenting. There is no experimentation in my work. Most of the time, and even from the very beginning, my work has been built on what you might call an in-depth study and deep immersion in what I am doing.
In this episode, we are joined by Dirar Kalash, a Palestinian musician and sound artist. His work spans a wide spectrum of music and sound and includes performance, composition, and improvisation. Dhirar has released several solo and collaborative albums and tours as a live musician. He also creates sound installations, live audiovisual performances, and conducts interdisciplinary research.
Improvisation, for me, isn't simply about spontaneity or reacting in the moment, even if that's how it often appears in practice. It actually comes from deep engagement, thorough study, and a strong understanding of the tools, techniques, and approaches to the work that you are doing. This reflects how I work in everything, not just in music, and not just in sound art. To me, that's what experimental means. Not only for us, not only in our Arabic culture, but also within globalized culture as a result of globalization. I am saying tajribi, experimental, in English here, just to make the distinction clearer. Most people use the term as just a label, without any real depth or substance.
Dhirar is uncomfortable with the term experimental, or tajribi in Arabic, because it is often used loosely and without real meaning, both in the Arab world and globally. Through his work, he seeks to spark a deeper conversation about how we interpret modernism, experimentation, and cultural relationship with the West. Rather than being reduced to a simplistic East-West binary, his work emerges as part of more complex and nuanced cultural experience.
I mean, in the end, any work we do is born of the moment, but also shaped by accumulation, by which I mean accumulation over time. For me, poetry, for example, Arabic vertical poetry or classical poetry, not the kind of vertical poetry written these days, or contemporary poetry. Even in a religious sense, and I don't want this to be misunderstood, but for example, the language of the Holy Quran, from a linguistic perspective, surpasses any literary text that claims to be postmodern. Practically speaking, how the Quran is recited, the way it sounds, that kind of embodied practice is something I incorporate into my own work. My work emerges from that approach. I don't consider my work disconnected from classical Arabic vertical poetry, or even from the religious texts of the Holy Quran.
Having been deeply exposed to European culture, Dhirar's rejection of prepackaged categories like experimental music stems from his commitment to authenticity.
Here is an example I love to share. Once, I was performing a saxophone solo, and someone told me I played as if it were a recital, like I was reciting the Quran. because of the way I break up the melody. And this comment didn't entirely surprise me, because it was intentional. I mean, I was born and raised in Palestine. Of course, through my education and time abroad, I've gained some knowledge of European culture. But ultimately, all of my work comes from my personal experience, not based on some kind of generalized or universal knowledge. For example, I play the piano, but I've never once wanted to play classical music on it. I don't relate to it culturally. For me, it's far more meaningful to incorporate practices derived from our Palestinian and Arab worlds.
For Dhirar, playing music isn't an end in itself, but a means of understanding and deconstructing the lived contradictions Palestinians face. He doesn't see art as merely a creative response, but as an existential choice, one that began with a pivotal political event, the Second Intifada, or Al-Aqsa Intifada, that erupted in the autumn of 2000. This marked a true turning point, making him realize that music is not just an art form, but a tool of understanding reality and engaging with the daily Palestinian experience.
During those days, when we used to listen to the songs of Sheikh Imam, Marcel Khalifa, and Sabrin, almost all of them, you can go through all of the patriotic songs that were a part of our lives, in our generation specifically. I was 18 years old, still a teenager, but I noticed a contradiction between the content of these songs, in terms of their melodies and music and so on, and the reality that we live in. Ultimately, another big question is what sounds can be called Palestinian sounds? What music can we call Palestinian music? It used to frustrate me to the core when I heard the sound of the oud played over scenes of torture and destruction. For me, it was problematic, not because of the music or the sound of the oud itself, but because it raised an existential problem. How can we place the sound of the oud over scenes of destruction? It doesn't make much sense. And I'm not making an artistic point here. It's a deeply political question. A clear rejection. I can't deny that what I felt was a kind of existential refusal of it. In the end, I said to myself, if I can't find something that encompasses all these contradictions and all that heavy weight we carry on a daily basis, maybe I should try to create it myself, put simply.
Alongside working in music, Dhirar also spends time on intellectual writing, using it to navigate his daily experiences and the questions that arise. He approaches sound and instruments in the same way he approaches his writing. Instruments for him are not an end in themselves, but tools he selects based on the intuitive sound he's seeking and what he wants to convey musically. He likens instruments to different linguistic forms, poetry, prose, and dialect, each suited to a particular context. In a similar way, each instrument expresses something that another one cannot. Although he stresses that this is a loose comparison, not literal, as music and language are both intricate, complex worlds.
It's the same if we take something as, quote-unquote, an extreme example, like the ney, the Arabic flute, and the saxophone. Everyone knows that the ney is often described as having a delicate, sweet, and tender tone. With all of those kinds of descriptors, ultimately, I think that's a cultural mistake. We project our own concepts onto the sound of the ney. The ney can actually exceed the range and tone that we usually associate with it. That's just a side point. But for example, what I want to say on the saxophone isn't exactly what I want to say on the ney.
As a child, Dhirar learned how to play instruments such as Daoud, violin, ney, and the piano, like many school children in Palestine, but he did it as a hobby, not professionally. A pivotal turning point came at the age of 18, coinciding with the Intifada, when, by chance, he came across some recordings of black musicians playing the saxophone and piano. He didn't know much about black movements in the US at the time, only that they were against racism. Yet, instinctively, he sensed that this music carried something very deep and profound. It spoke from a context that directly resonated with his own. It touched him as a Palestinian, searching for a sound that could convey his complex reality. From that moment on, he began teaching himself the saxophone and piano, discovering a new musical language both culturally and intellectually. He considers this the beginning of a path that led him to the world of sound in which he works today.
It sparked my musical interest when I was 18 years old. I was exposed to the world of black music, particularly jazz music, by accident. It came at a time when I was asking questions about our music culture and our sound culture and all of these things. By chance, I was listening to recordings of black musicians playing the saxophone and piano, and I felt that they had something to say. And if we're talking about my culture as a Palestinian and an Arab, it's a different type and shape of struggle to the black struggle in the United States. I mean, one knows that there is something called racism, but what are the circumstances? And what are the methods? As I said, I was 18, so I started to look into it more. What really caught my attention was that I felt their music resonated with me deeply. There was something in it, something reflected more deeply in the music that wasn't merely artistic or merely... I felt like they were saying something and I could really feel it, in a nutshell. From that moment on, I became interested in the piano and the saxophone. It was a major rupture for me, culturally, intellectually, and musically. From then onward, I started learning the sax and the piano and the language of this music. It is what ultimately led me to where I am now. The journey is still ongoing, but, it was this particular moment that led me to where I am today.
Dhirar was born with a hearing impairment, but says it neither limits nor interferes with his relationship to music. His entry into the world of sound was a political choice, not out of a desire to preserve his heritage, but because he sees Palestinian sound as an organic and essential component of the political experience.
The occupier does not see my inner thoughts. The occupier only sees my body as a Palestinian body. I do not see myself... I do not frame myself as... I do not separate consciousness from my existence as a Palestinian. Ultimately, my presence and my relationship with this land passes directly through my body. And the body here is not metaphorical. When we walk in the street every day, when we communicate with people, we see them, we use our senses to communicate. Ultimately, it's kind of a material mechanism in which we organically produce our culture, including music and sound. It's a direct relationship to the extent that even if I have a hearing limitation, it doesn't matter because my body is there. Once again, sound or music practice is not something separate from my daily life, regardless of whether it has a sonic or auditory elements. They are always present. My body feels them and connects with them, regardless of whether I can hear them or not.
Dhirar sees the relationship between hearing and music differently than most people. He hasn't gradually developed an ability to hear music. It's much simpler than that. To him, musical sounds are actually clearer than human speech.
I face more problems with human communication, speech, and dialogue. In music, there's a lot of people who think I can hear really well because of how I play instruments and how I play music. But what I would like to say specifically is that working in music and things like that, That's what has helped me think about music and sound in dimensions that are not audible.
What matters most, in his view, is not what he hears, but how he thinks about music. Dhirar doesn't see sound purely as an auditory experience, but as a form of reasoning. He compares it to mathematics. This way of thinking allows him to approach music as a system of relationships rather than simply as a melody.
This idea isn't new. It predates Islamic culture and goes back to the Greek era. In both Arab and Islamic intellectual traditions, the connection between music and maths is well established. For example, when Ibn Sina wrote about music, his work on the subject was considered part of both musical theory and mathematics, not just the arts. This connection has been made since the time of the ancient Greeks, when discussions about mathematics and music often went hand in hand. For me, music is essentially audible mathematics. Just as we can hear music, we can also think about it mathematically. Of course, music also gives us something beyond that. It reflects meaning, existence, and the human experience. Just like how mathematics supports fields like biology, physics, chemistry, or astronomy, the same principle applies to music.
In 2014, Dhirar began working between Palestine and Europe to be able to perform live with greater freedom. Live performances are a core part of his work, and in our region, particularly Palestine, such performances are not only uncommon, but also difficult to carry out. This isn't due to a lack of audience interest, but because the infrastructure itself does not always support continuous musical engagements.
Ultimately, as much as people see my work as quote-unquote different, or say that I'm doing something strange, or that it's been produced abroad, the people in Palestine and people in the Arab world are capable of understanding, engaging, and interacting with all these kinds of arts. First of all, it's not about content nor artistic direction or budgets. The main point to all of this is understanding what our own cultural vision is and how we navigate the relationship between cultural institutions, theaters, and the public.
Dhirar doesn't see any significant difference between the audience at home and the audience abroad. For him, it's not just a matter of musical tastes and what people are familiar with, but a deeper question about the relationship between the artist, the audience, and the spaces where they come together. Whether at home or abroad, Dhirar insists he never underestimates his audience. He doesn't simplify his work to make it more accessible, nor does he cater to current trends or change to adopt a popular style, as so often happens in commercial music. Instead, he engages with complex music and presents it with confidence, trusting that people, even if they don't grasp it right away, are capable of connecting with it and feeling its emotional depth.
I see my relationship with the audience as one where I never underestimate their intelligence or cognitive abilities. It's not like I come in thinking, oh, our audience won't get this music or won't understand it. I start from the belief that even when I present complex, overwhelming, or heavy material, your average person, the ordinary listener, is capable of connecting with it, understanding it, and engaging with the process. Even if at first glance they seem to, quote-unquote, not get it, I still don't doubt their ability to understand and absorb it.
Nonetheless, Dhirar believes there is a lingering reluctance to embrace unconventional styles and approaches to music. He points to the many Palestinian artists creating powerful new compositions, yet the audience continues to ask for old songs. For him, this isn't just a problem for the artist. It reflects a broader cultural crisis tied to how we engage with art and with the political and social context we live in. Dhirar believes that change is not only possible, but necessary. Instead of endlessly revisiting songs from the 1960s and 70s, why not create new works today, in the same spirit that speak to our current reality?
I think it all comes down to a collective responsibility. how we want to shape the dialogue between the artist and the audience. The audience, too, has a duty to be honest with the artist. What I mean is that the audience should understand that the goal of an artist isn't just to present to the audience what they're already used to or what they already know, but to communicate something that comes from the reality we live in every day. It reflects the idea that the artist, or the cultural producer more broadly, is someone who thinks, creates, and always has something new to say. We can't just keep repeating the same things over and over again.
Dhirar recognizes the importance and value of collective work, but he's also aware of the limitations imposed by cultural contexts. In Palestine, based on his experience, collective work isn't always possible because of a narrow view of musical roles. Each musician tends to see himself only within his own framework, rather than a part of a larger collective structure.
The problem is not an individual problem. It feels like it's a collective issue, not just mine as an individual. Even among musicians from the region, each person tends to focus solely on their own role. A percussionist, for example, sees himself only as a percussionist. Similarly, for example, if I am an oud player, I identify strictly with that role. He doesn't see himself as part of a broader, more interconnected musical space. There are so many things I'd love to work on collaboratively. But, unfortunately, the prevailing values of individualism between musicians creates a barrier between me and others. This is something I really hope to shift in my relationships with musicians in Palestine, specifically. That said, I'd also love to continue working here as well. But, to be honest, I'm mostly referring to my experience working over there, in Palestine.
Dhirar sees music as an essential part of life, not something limited to entertainment or artistic expression. He doesn't compartmentalize music as a separate project, but sees it as intrinsic to daily life, encompassing the details of observing, experiencing, and simply being. It's not just about setting goals and achieving them, but about cultivating a space that is always open to work, experimentation, and interaction.
Music is a vital part of society. This is something that doesn't really need an introduction. There isn't a person in the world who doesn't listen to music on a daily basis. It is tangible, palpable, and ever-present. It is an integral part of our daily lives. That's why it is important for us to understand music's social and cultural role, and to recognize just how significant its presence is. Therefore, that musicians exist is important too. There are many people, for example, who feel ashamed to admit that music is their bread and butter, that you can make a living from it. But if we truly understood the role of music and culture in daily life, and how deeply it is embedded in our lives, then we would also understand that artists and musicians have a right to earn a living from their work. We know that music is constantly part of our daily lives, whether we like it or not. And so, it is essential to recognize both the economic and social dimensions that ultimately connect musicians with music.
A new story is always unfolding with Dhirar. Music ideas that rise from the rhythms of daily life, woven into the fabric of his being.
It is normal for me to create new music. I can present one idea in 20 different ways. That is what keeps me working, keeps me producing, and keeps me thinking. I imagine that until the last day of my life, I will continue making music using this approach. I mean, Regardless of whether I release work or not, I always have something to work on.
Moving across the landscapes of Palestinian sound, the experience of the body, and the necessities of life, Dhirar doesn't conform to a single musical genre, nor does he seek definitive answers. Each work is a fresh attempt to understand and move closer to a sound, not necessarily audible, but palpable, alive, and evolving from moment to moment. Dhirar's work isn't about providing answers, but about continuing to pose questions from within, from the heart of life, from Palestine. This episode was co-produced by Sowt and Komet Kashakeel, with voice actor Ramzi DeHani narrating our guest musician Dirar Kalash. This episode was researched and written by Rabab Al-Rzini and produced and edited in Arabic and reviewed in English by Jana Qazzaz. English translation and production by Lauren Pepperell and Mahmoud El Saghir. Sound by Mohamad, Khreizat, Ahmad Mitry and Mahmoud El Saghir. Managing producer, Tala Halawa. Access coordinator, Yaz Brien. Access consultant, Lightfoot. Our theme music was created by Ameer Moussa. And I'm your host, Rana Daoud. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on this episode in the comments on Radio Thamania and Castbox. And we'd love your ratings on Apple Podcasts. You can also connect with us on Instagram and X at Dumtak Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening right now. This season was funded by the British Council's International Collaboration Grant. Dumtak and Loosely Adapted are productions of Sowt.